We're joined by Adam Kinzinger, former congressman from Illinois, author of the new book, Renegade, Defending Democracy and Liberty in Our Divided Country. So why'd you write the book?
Well, look, it's funny when people said you're writing a book about yourself feels like inherently arrogant. They're right, it does. But I realized that my story actually tells the broader story, which is like what's happened to the GOP, some of the challenges in there, bigger challenges of the country. And so I just want people to be able to look back and say, like, look, a lot of us didn't see some of this coming. We saw some parts of this, coming, but we're in real trouble and we need some help. And here's how we got there. So I think that's really the big motivation behind writing it, because I just think, particularly the Republican Party is in a very unhealthy place at the moment.
What happens if Donald Trump becomes president again in January 2025?
Well, look, I think it's really dangerous. I think, January 6th was like, if you think of a guardrail on an interstate, the car hit the guardrail and we survived. The guardrails of democracy held up. The problem is the weaknesses are there now and people know where they are. And so just like the guardrails on an interstate can take a hit, they can't take a second hit. And I think if that car hits that again, if Donald Trump is reelected, he's not going to put people around him that are, willing to tell him no, or willing to say, like, no, sir, my commitment is to the Constitution. He'll be able to find people that'll be willing to say, yeah, I'll do anything you want. I mean, you just have to interview probably 20 candidates for attorney general, sadly, to find one willing to say, yeah, whatever you want me to do, I'll do it, including drop the charges against you. So I think it's a really dangerous moment, and it's one that we can't take too lightly. I mean, it's a real possibility he could win.
You think he pardons all the January 6th defendants? You think he gets rid of his own cases? What else do you think happens in those opening days?
Well, I think he first off just puts complete, utter sycophants to him around the Oval Office and around the White House. And what that means is you get not well-qualified people, of course, and people that just want to respond to his whims. He gets no pushback. I think he does end up kind of mass pardoning the January 6th defendants. He's basically said as much. And if his cases are still pending, he could either pardon himself, maybe if he's already been convicted in theory, or he can just simply direct the Department of Justice to drop the cases against him, and DOJ will do that. I mean, we've taken for granted the impartiality of the Department of Justice, because for the most part we've had people unwilling to fight that, to violate it. That's not Donald Trump, though.
You were part of this unsurpassed investigation into the 2020 election, denialism, and January 6th. You saw all the evidence. You talked to all the witnesses. What do you make of the case Jack Smith brought in Washington about the 2020 election itself?
Well, without seeing all the evidence, I'm going to assume it's really strong, for a couple of reasons. Number one, Mark Meadows shared with us a lot of information before he quit cooperating. There was a lot more we knew he knew that we wish he would have shared. But the little amount he did share, or I guess half of whatever he ended up sharing, it really opened to us a Pandora's box of exactly how deep the January 6th planning went. And I think that's where we got a lot of our initial leads from. So I'm sure Jack Smith has been able to kind of build off of that. He's been able to talk to more people than we have. We can try to enforce our subpoenas, but DOJ has a much better ability to do that. They can just decide to charge somebody, where we have to go to DOJ and get them to charge for us. And so and they can also offer immunity, which we could have. We chose not to because we didn't want to interfere with a potential investigation. And so I think his case is going to be really strong. I think it's going to probably be open and shut, and I typically believe in the jury system. So we'll see how it goes, but I've got to assume he's going to have a pretty powerful case.
From your work in that investigation and on that committee, you have characterized what happened to you inside your party as a shunning like fundamentalists would do from those who have been excommunicated. Explain what that was like.
Yeah, I mean, look, I've come to believe that people fear almost more than they fear death. They fear being kicked out of a tribe. They fear a loss of identity, particularly when they've invested so much in who they've become and how people see them. And so I knew that if I did the January 6th stuff, but I also knew I couldn't avoid it because my moral compass just required it. But I knew that I'd be kicked out of a tribe. I lost a lot of friends that obviously, looking back, weren't friends because they never would have broken with you over something like this if they truly were. I had extended family send me a certified letter. I mean, how nuts is that to actually go through the process of certifying a letter to send to me, disowning me, saying I was part of the devil's army. And, I had my co-pilot in Iraq from, a year ago send me a text message that said he's ashamed to have ever flown with me. So I don't say that to try to get people's sympathy, because everybody has a story like that. Time Thanksgiving dinner was broken up because of something Uncle Ron or whatever said. But the problem is it shouldn't be like that. And it's why there's so much cowardice in politics today, I think, because that is the ultimate fear politicians have of being kicked out of that tribe, even more than I think they fear giving their own life for something.
It's a new House Speaker now. Trump seemed to have his fingerprints a little bit on that election and who couldn't win that election when Tom Emmer pulled out. Tom Emmer, who voted to certify the election in 2020. What do you think about the new Speaker and how he got to that spot?
Well, first off, I want to just point out the split screen between Jenna Ellis, I think almost that same day, reading in front of the nation a confession that she lied about the election being stolen. And she was like the fourth person to take a plea, saying, yes, they misled the American people in this Georgia issue. And converse that with, now if you wanted to run for Speaker of the House, you had to be an election denier. That was like the cost of entry. It goes to show how out of touch, frankly, the Republican Party is right now in D.C., and it goes to show how they just don't care about truth. Mike Johnson, look, he's a blank slate, so people kind of say he presents well. The only interaction I ever really had with him was him asking me to join a lawsuit that he was leading to help throw out the election results in places like Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. He claims to be a man of faith, and I guess I don't doubt that, except I'm sure he's smart enough to know the election wasn't stolen, so why continue to lie about it? For what? Look, I wish him luck, because if he succeeds, the country succeeds. But I'm disappointed in what the Republican Party has done, and I was impressed that they had kept Jim Jordan out of there, but they unfortunately didn't have the strength to do it twice.
I want to unpack that answer. I think there's something important in there, in particular. You think Mike Johnson and any number of other Republicans in the House with you knew the election wasn't stolen, just knew it, and we're doing this cravenly.
I mean, it's 100% true. Look, I think there's a few now, particularly in the new class, that, ran as kind of stop the steal folks, maybe that truly believe it. But it's very few, very few. The vast majority of them know the truth, but they choose to lie. And I don't know, I mean, for me, I haven't been able to get into why they can do it, except that there's a belief. And I think Jim Jordan's one of these, and maybe Mr. Johnson is too, I don't know. But that truly believes the left is so evil, their words, that is so evil that any way to beat them, you have to beat them, no matter what it takes, even if it's lying, even if it's stealing. That's a very frightening thing, and democracy does not survive under those conditions. And that's why I think, frankly, in 2024, the only thing on the ballot is not names, it's not issues, it's do you support democracy or don't you support democracy, because I think it's that important of a moment.
You surprised Trump's doing so well in early polling?
Yes, I'm surprised every day, but I guess I'm not surprised knowing the fact that very few have pushed back on him. I think the surprise comes that very few have pushed back on him. If all these other influencers, not named Donald Trump, these people running for president, are willing to say that there's a two-tiered system of justice and he's a victim and he didn't steal the election, all that kind of stuff, then it's no doubt and it's no surprise that the base believes that Donald Trump is a victim, because everybody else tells him he is. So it's just a complete lack of courage, I think, in the GOP, where if there were more courageous leaders, it might change some things. It might change some things.
During the recent speaker race, there were all these House Republicans who said they got death threats, threats against their families because of how they were or were not voting. You have, in your book, detailed pretty visceral threats against you and against your family. Do you still get that? Does that still hang over you like a cloud with some people?
I think it hangs over us as a family kind of emotionally. We don't get them as much directly because I don't think people really know where to send them anymore. Certainly, I see them on social media and stuff. And, and by the way, these were death threats directed at my 6-month-old at the time, who's now 2, child. I mean, that just goes to show the kind of brain rot that exists when you get so angry about politics and you're probably drinking and watching whatever that you're going to make a call and threaten somebody's life. It's awful. I'll point out that, to some of my colleagues that got these death threats over the speaker's vote, it's terrible. None of them spoke out when Liz Cheney and I got it, but that doesn't mean I won't speak out when they get it, because it's just a wrong way to do democracy. And honestly, one of the times it's not going to be the people that make calls and threaten that are actually scary. The scary ones are the ones that don't say anything, that make a decision to go. And we're not far from that moment in this country, unfortunately.
All right. I just want to wrap on one other question, somewhat unrelated. We have this new debate over aid for Israel and Ukraine. And you can just see the divide among Republicans. So many senators saying you do it all at once, you send a message to the world that we are going to combat terror and attacks on liberty and democracy. You have Republicans in the House saying our constituents don't support this and we have to be their voice. No to the Ukraine aid and let's not put it together. Where do you fall on that?
Well, the problem is their constituents do support it, but what these Republicans have come to start to think of is only the base as their constituency. So if they live, let's say it's even a Republican district, and you take a poll within the Republican Party, maybe it's 60-40 against aid, whatever it is in the district. But you also represent Democrats and independents. Even in the most Republican district, you have Democrats and independents. Their constituency does support Ukraine and does support Israel. I think it would be hard to find a district around the country that didn't. But they only now think of the base as their constituency. So when they say my constituents want me to do something, they mean the base. And the point I'll make on that is this. When you're not willing to lead and tell the truth to that base, they're only going to hear the loudest voice on Twitter. We have got to, as a country, do this, like spend a fraction of what we spend on defense in just 1 year to defeat the Russians, to defend democracy, not proverbially in the United States, but literally in Ukraine. And of course, we obviously know defeat terror in Israel. But the fact that they're playing games with funding and how we're going to put them together goes to show the lack of seriousness when they're going to cut the IRS to pay for it. And the only reason they pick the IRS is because they can go on other news channels and raise money by going after the IRS, which nobody loves.
Author of the new book, Renegade, Defending Democracy and Liberty in Our Divided Country, Adam Kinzinger served in the U.S. House from Illinois. Thanks for the time.